it's a battle, but it is.
It begins in silence. A man alone, lit only by the flicker of a screen, eyes glazed, breath shallow. The moment after is always the same. Stillness, shame, emptiness. But not because of what he saw, because of what he didn't face. This is not about morality. This is about war. And not the kind fought with blades. The kind fought in shadows. The kind fought when no one is watching. Miyamoto Musashi didn't speak of enemies as something external. He spoke of indulgence, of impulse, of the small, silent ways a man betrays his own code. You think it's just a habit. You think it's private, harmless, a release. But what it really is erosion. You feel it, even if you've never said it out loud. That numbness, that dissonance, like you expected something and got less. The mind recognizes the image, but the body, the soul, the nervous system, they know it's a lie. The theory of reward. Prediction error explains it. Your brain craves intimacy and instead receives simulation, a promise unfulfilled. Over time, this breaks something sacred, your sense of alignment. Musashi lived in brutal austerity, not because he hated pleasure, but because he feared blindness. He knew that indulgence, even subtle, even mental, softens the sword of perception. Porn is not about sex. It's about sedation. It's not pleasure. It's noise. And once you understand that, the question shifts. Not, how do I quit? But what am I running from? This is the hidden battle. Not against pixels, but against presence. Not against temptation, but against the terrifying stillness beneath it. And until you see it as war, you'll keep pretending it's comfort. You'll keep calling dishonor relief. And Musashi, he would have called that defeat. Pleasure without presence is poison. There's a kind of pleasure that doesn't feed you. It empties you. Slowly, quietly. Porn promises connection, but offers simulation. It delivers sensation without intimacy, climax without meaning, repetition without depth. And at first, that seems harmless. Just a moment of relief. But over time, that moment stretches. It becomes a loop, a ritual, a form of escape you no longer question. And the cost? It's not obvious. It's not dramatic. It's internal, invisible. It's your attention, your vitality, your presence, slowly bleeding out of your life without a sound. What begins as comfort becomes erosion. You don't notice it until your motivation weakens. Your clarity fades. Your ability to be fully present with another person, to look them in the eyes and not flinch, starts to decay. It's not because you're broken. It's because you've trained your nervous system to chase shadow instead of substance. Porn isn't poison because of the image. It's poison because of the absence of real presence, of earned connection, of embodied experience. Musashi said, "To win any battle, you must fight as if you're already dead." And yet most men refuse to even enter the battlefield. They avoid the fight, not because it's too painful, but because it requires full presence, full discomfort, full exposure, and that feels more dangerous than any enemy. But the truth remains, disembodied pleasure dulls the sword. You cannot touch your true power through sedation. You only find it when you stop chasing relief and choose instead to return to presence, no matter how sharp it feels. Because pleasure is not the enemy, but pleasure without presence. That is a slow, spiritual suicide. And Musashi would have known it. He lived not in denial of pleasure, but in reverence of clarity. And clarity can't coexist with indulgence that blinds. Your brain wasn't built for infinite reward. The human brain was forged in scarcity, not in abundance. It evolved to chase, to strive, to earn. Dopamine, the chemical we now blame, was never the enemy. It was the spark that propelled us toward meaning, toward survival, toward connection. But in a world of endless novelty, of instant gratification, that spark has become a wildfire. And nowhere does it burn more quietly than in the realm of digital indulgence, where porn floods the reward system with surges that were meant to be rare. Every time you watch, your brain expects intimacy, real contact, real risk, real reward. But instead, it gets images, loops, simulation, and that mismatch, what neuroscience calls the reward, prediction error, begins to confuse your system. Anticipation builds. Release arrives, but the emotional return is hollow. And so the brain chases again, not because it's satisfied, but because it's still starving. Over time, this cycle rewires perception. Real connection becomes too slow, too subtle, too demanding. The fantasy becomes the norm. The screen becomes safer than the skin. And as that gap widens, a deeper kind of loss begins. You stop desiring intimacy, not because you're broken, but because your mind no longer associates it with reward. Musashi warned of this in another form. He spoke of the path of ease as the path of decay, because what requires no effort cannot sharpen you. What offers no resistance cannot make you resilient. And the infinite stimulation of porn does exactly that. It offers everything, but demands nothing, and so it leaves you with nothing. No hunger, no edge, no presence. The warrior's brain was shaped to pursue depth, meaning, danger even, not loops of artificial pleasure. And when you understand that, the question isn't, how do I stop watching? It becomes, what kind of mind am I training to live inside? One that still feels, or one that only reacts? One that still longs for reality, or one that has surrendered to the illusion of ease? Why most discipline fails. Here, the reason most men fail to break the cycle isn't because they're lazy. It's not because they lack willpower. It's because they are still approaching a spiritual battle with mechanical tools. They think streaks, blocks, and punishments will fix what is, at its core, a crisis of identity. But you cannot quit what you still secretly believe comforts you. You cannot walk away from a trap that still feels like home. Most discipline fails here because it never asks the deeper question, who do you think you are without this? Musashi didn't live in discipline for the sake of ascetic pride. He built his environment like a fortress, not around comfort, but around clarity. He knew that in the absence of structure, chaos would creep in. And so he trained in silence, surrounded himself with nothing that could soften his attention, and lived with a code that made relapse into weakness impossible. Not because he feared failure, but because he revered presence. Most men who try to quit porn still live like consumers. Their spaces are filled with convenience. Their routines lack friction. Their minds are stimulated from the moment they wake up to the second they fall asleep. And yet they expect to change by adding another rule to the noise. But without a deeper shift, without a transformation in how you inhabit discomfort, abstinence becomes a countdown, not a breakthrough. You don't fail because you're broken. You fail because you haven't fully entered the war. You haven't yet grieved the version of yourself that thought pleasure was peace. You haven't yet created the rituals that replace the sedative with sacredness. And until that happens, discipline remains a mask, a temporary push against a tide you never stopped feeding. True discipline doesn't feel like force. It feels like alignment. It's not about resisting the urge. It's about no longer seeing it as nourishment. And that doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from becoming someone else. Someone who no longer sees escape as an option. Someone who stands in the fire and calls it home. A modern warrior's ritual. The hour of stillness. There's a kind of hunger that isn't solved by pleasure, but by presence. And yet most men today are starving, not for stimulation, but for silence. For a moment, untouched by distraction. For a space where the mind can finally show what's underneath. Musashi didn't train in noise. He didn't prepare for battle surrounded by comfort. He sought the friction of solitude, the discipline of boredom. The sharpness that only emerges when everything else is stripped away. So this becomes the ritual. 1 hour. No screen, no sound, no stimulation. Just you, just the silence. Just the part of you that's been drowned beneath layers of escape. Let the urges come. Let the discomfort rise. Don't move. Don't react. Don't edit. Sit in the middle of it. Let the nervous system reset. Let the mind unclench. Let the self, the one behind the habits, behind the cravings, finally speak. And when it does, write. Not to fix, not to analyze, but to witness. Let the unconscious spill across the page like a wound, opening, not for attention, but for healing. You'll notice the panic, the need to check, the itch for relief. But if you stay long enough, something shifts. A stillness that feels less like deprivation and more like discovery, like meeting a part of yourself that was buried beneath years of digital dust. Musashi trained in caves and forests, not to be extreme, but to remove the noise that weakens focus. He knew that to see clearly, the mind must first be emptied. And today, in a world where clarity is polluted by infinite inputs, the warrior's ritual is not to add more, it's to subtract until only the essential remains. Because presence is forged in friction, and the more you resist the silence, the more power it holds over you. The hour of stillness is not about endurance, it's about remembrance, of what you are when nothing is numbing you, of what you can become when the escape ends. Not a perfect man, but a present one. And in a world obsessed with hiding, presence is the rarest form of power. You're not addicted to porn, you're addicted to escape. This was never just about pixels, never just about pleasure. It was always about presence, and the fear of it, because the screen is easy, the scroll is familiar, the rush is predictable. But silence, stillness, that's where the real battle begins. Most men aren't addicted to porn, they're addicted to absence, to numbness, to the quick death of discomfort. Musashi would have seen that not as failure, but as dishonor, not because of shame, but because of the abandonment of one's post. Every man is assigned a position in life, not by society, not by status, but by soul, a post only he can hold. And every time he escapes that responsibility for artificial relief, he leaves it unguarded. He weakens the edge, not of morality, but of clarity, of sovereignty, of truth. Jordan Peterson said, "You're not just avoiding tasks, you're avoiding becoming." And that's the heart of it. Every moment you run from discomfort, you run from the man you could be. Musashi wrote, "Do nothing which is of no use." And yet, how much of your time, your mind, your essence is spent in rituals that subtract your strength, not because you don't care, but because you've forgotten how it feels to be fully in your body, fully awake, fully alive. Porn is not the enemy. Escapism is. And the war is not about abstinence. It's about presence, rebuilding a mind that can sit with itself without needing to flee. The true fight isn't against the internet, or desire, or urges. It's against the silence that reveals who you are beneath them. Most will never face it. Most will never win. But those who do, those who choose to stay, to feel, to endure, become something the modern world no longer expects. Whole, not perfect, not pure, just present. And in a time of running, that alone is enough to call a man a warrior. Conclusion: the true war was never about pleasure. The war has never been about porn. It was never about lust, or images, or shame. It was about what you abandon every time you choose sedation over confrontation. Musashi didn't see the enemy as something to be hated, but as something that reveals your readiness. And the way you relate to this habit, this pattern, this escape, it reveals yours. Not your strength, but your honesty. Because the man who escapes pleasure to protect his edge is not disciplined. He is devoted. Devoted to something deeper than impulse. Devoted to the clarity born only from discomfort. We are not meant to live asleep, not meant to perform, not meant to pacify the sacred rage inside of us with pixels and patterns and soft screens. Musashi lived with a sword in hand, not for violence, but for precision, for alignment, for presence. And today, your sword is not steel, it's attention. Your battlefield is not outside, it's within. Your discipline is not a test, it's a ritual, a return, a refusal to forget what matters. This isn't about quitting, it's about reclaiming, not just your focus, not just your dignity, but your seat at the table of yourself. That place where silence isn't a threat, where boredom isn't feared, where presence becomes power again. Jordan Peterson reminds us that avoidance is not passive. It is a betrayal of your potential. And Musashi reminds us that clarity only arrives through confrontation. So the question that remains is not, how do you stop? But what will you stand for when no one is watching? Because that stillness, that choice, that refusal to escape, is the real definition of honor, and it cannot be faked. It must be lived, moment by moment, in silence, in friction, in the raw, invisible places where men are no longer boys, and warriors are no longer pretending to sleep.